Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. I met Lila at a neighborhood block party that smelled like grilled corn and sunscreen. She wore a yellow dress and an easy smile, and when we talked, it felt like I'd known her for years. We married 2 summers later in a small church with twinkle lights strung along the pews. Her family was loud in the best way: big Sunday dinners, birthday cakes that could feed a team, group texts that pinged at all hours with memes and updates. I didn't grow up with that kind of noise, but I learned to love it. Her younger sister Tara floated through those gatherings like a comet. She liked attention and usually got it. She was the kind of person who told stories using both hands, who changed her hair color every season, who called at midnight just to say she'd found the perfect boots on sale. Lila rolled her eyes at the drama, but adored her anyway. I tried to keep a friendly distance. You never want to get between sisters. The lie began on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd come home from work with paint on my sleeves because I was helping set up a company charity event. Lila stood in the kitchen with her phone in her fist, and a look that drained all the color from the room. "We need to talk," she said, and those words landed like a gavel. Tara had called her sobbing. According to the tale, she and I had been carrying on a secret relationship, and now she was pregnant. She said she had evidence. She said she was scared. She said she didn't want to ruin a marriage but couldn't hide the truth anymore. I laughed at first, a shocked, impossible sound that tangled with panic. "That's crazy," I said. "You know that's not true." But Lila's face wasn't the face of someone who knew anything for sure. She stared at a point just past my shoulder, like the air behind me had turned into a screen showing every betrayal in movie history. I tried to explain I'd barely been alone with Tara. I reminded her of the weeks of late-night spreadsheets, the coworkers who could vouch for my time. Lila's questions came sharp, one after another, a desperate search for a version of events that could make the world stable again. Every time I answered, she flinched as if my words stung. Then Tara arrived. She walked straight into our living room with blotchy cheeks and a trembling chin, and she delivered the performance of a lifetime. She said she'd made a mistake. She said I'd promised we'd figure it out. She said she couldn't live with the guilt. At one point, she produced a crumpled receipt from a diner across town and claimed it was our spot. It was a place I'd been to once with my boss after a client meeting, but in that moment, doubt wrapped itself around the room and squeezed. "Tell her the truth," I said, incredulous. "Tara, this is not okay." She looked at the floor. "I'm sorry, Lila," she whispered. It wasn't an apology to me. It was a cue designed to pull pity in her direction. Something inside Lila collapsed. She stepped toward me, eyes wet and furious, and before I could say another word, she slapped my cheek. It wasn't hard enough to do real damage. It was hard enough to tell me a wall had gone up. She turned away like she couldn't stand the sight of me. I said we should all calm down, that we needed facts, that a test would settle the question. The suggestion made Tara cry harder. Lila took her to the guest room and shut the door. That night I slept on the couch and didn't sleep at all. I scrolled through old photos of Lila and me at baseball games, on hikes, laughing on the couch with the dog we fostered for a week. I tried to imagine the version of me that could do what Tara claimed. I couldn't find him anywhere. At dawn, I heard the guest room door open and the soft murmur of the sisters' voices plotting the next steps as if I were a headline and not a person. By noon, the story had grown legs. Her brothers, Matt and Cody, showed up with tight jaws and set shoulders. They didn't want to talk, they wanted to handle it. I stepped outside to avoid a scene, but they followed. The argument started with accusations and escalated. I said words I'm not proud of. They pushed me. I stumbled against the railing. It stopped short of real harm, but the message was clear. I was no longer family. Neighbors peeked through blinds. I felt myself shrinking to the size of a rumor. Lila watched from the porch with her arms crossed and a pain I didn't know how to touch. She told me to leave for a few days while they sorted everything out. I asked if she trusted me. She didn't answer. That silence said everything. I packed a small bag with shirts and a worn pair of jeans. I grabbed a toothbrush and the book I'd been reading. I stared at our wedding photo on the dresser, the one where we laughed mid-ceremony because the flower girl had launched her petals like confetti, and I felt a hole open inside me big enough to swallow a house. I checked into a budget hotel off the highway and called my boss to ask for a few days. He sounded concerned but said to take the time. I walked laps around the parking lot listening to traffic hiss by. Texts from Lila trickled in. Not questions, not invitations to talk. Just instructions. Don't come home. Tara needs space. We'll discuss everything when emotions settle. Emotions did not settle. The group chat went silent. Her mother left me a voicemail laced with disappointment. Her father, usually calm, sent a single message. Fix this. How do you fix a lie that refuses to sit still? I called a lawyer a friend recommended just to understand my options. He told me to document everything. He told me not to contact Tara directly. He told me that truth often arrives slower than lies. I wrote that sentence on a motel notepad and underlined it twice. The following week, I returned to the house to collect more clothes at a time Lila said she'd be out. The door was locked from the inside. Tara opened it. She wore one of Lila's sweaters and a look that made me feel like an extra in my own life. She told me to wait while she called her sister. I stood on the porch where we used to drink iced coffee on lazy Saturdays and stared at the potted fern that was somehow still alive. When Lila arrived, we had the conversation I had begged for since day one. It lasted 5 minutes. She said she believed her sister. She said this wasn't who she thought I was. She said she couldn't even look at me without feeling sick. I asked again for a test, a timeline, anything that resembled reason. She said Tara was too fragile for that right now. Fragile like glass, sharp like glass too. Word reached my workplace through a cousin of a cousin. Whispers have wings. A promotion I'd been quietly in line for drifted away. Coworkers avoided eye contact in the break room. I heard my name paired with phrases that didn't belong to me. I learned how quickly a person can vanish while walking around in broad daylight. I moved out. I found a short-term sublet with mismatched chairs and a view of a brick wall. I paid my half of the mortgage until Lila refinanced, because I couldn't imagine leaving her with bills on top of heartbreak, even if the heartbreak wasn't mine to carry. Did that make me a fool? Maybe. Or maybe it made me the same person I was before the world bent out of shape. Every few days I wrote Lila a letter I never sent. I described small things. The waitress at the diner who drew smiley faces and ketchup for kids. The way the city sounded at 3 a.m, how sun hit the wall of my new place and turned it briefly gold. I tucked the letters into a shoebox and told myself I would hand them to her when the truth finally showed up. I pictured that day so often the fantasy became heavy as furniture. Then, one rainy afternoon, Matt, the older brother, called. His message was clipped. "We need to meet," he said. I should have refused. I should have asked for neutrality. Instead, I drove to the park where we'd tossed a football last fall. He was already there, sitting on a bench, not looking at me. "Tara says you're harassing her," he said, jaw tight. "I haven't spoken to her since the house," I replied. "Check my phone. Check my email. I've kept my distance." He stared at the empty path. "Just stay away." "I am away," I said softly. "All I want is proof, a test, a date, anything that lines up with reality." He didn't answer. The rain picked up. We stood under the park shelter like two strangers waiting for a bus that wouldn't come. That night I booked a one-way ticket, not to punish anyone, not to run forever. I needed space larger than the ache. I picked a city by a wide river where no one knew my last name and rented a room above a bakery that opened at dawn. The flight left at 8 a.m. I sent Lila a final text. "I love you. I am innocent. When you're ready for the truth, you'll know where to find me." I added the city and a friend's address as a backup. Then I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and watched the ceiling until light bled through the curtains. Before heading to the airport, I walked by our old house one last time, not to knock, just to say goodbye to the life built there. The porch light was off. The fern drooped, thirsty. A neighbor waved with the sympathy people reserve for funerals. I waved back. On the plane, I pressed my forehead to the window and made a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I would not let bitterness write the rest of my story. I would build something honest in that new city. I would send postcards to myself as proof that I still existed. I would leave room for grace, even if grace didn't leave room for me. The city greeted me with the smell of coffee and rain, the bakery downstairs hummed every morning with chatter, and the owner, Mr. Alvarez, saved the day-old sourdough for me because he said I looked like someone who needed extra toast. I found work at a small design firm willing to judge me by my portfolio, instead of my search engine results. The apartment came with squeaky floors and a fire escape, perfect for reading when the weather remembered kindness. At night, I walked along the river and let the current carry my thoughts away. Some nights it worked. Some nights I replayed everything until the stars blurred. On those nights I repeated the lawyer's line like a prayer. Truth arrives slower than lies. I imagined it traveling like a steady train that never rushes, always reaches the station. I didn't know then how long the train would take. I didn't know what it would look like when it finally pulled in. I only knew that I had stepped off a platform that no longer felt safe and trusted my legs to learn a new way to stand. Months turned into a year. I built small routines that stitched days together. Morning runs, weekend markets, calls to my parents on Sundays, volunteering at a community garden where teenagers learned to coax tomatoes from stubborn soil. I kept my head down and my heart open, in that order. I stopped checking Lila's social media. I stopped drafting letters. The shoebox went to the back of a closet and stayed there. Then, one late autumn evening, as wind rattled the windows and the river carried leaves like little boats, someone pounded on my door. Not a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. Not Mr. Alvarez with a bag of pastries. A frantic, insistent knock that echoed through my small place and straight into my chest. I opened the door. Lila stood there, hair damp from the rain, eyes exhausted, hands shaking around a folder thick with papers. She looked smaller than I remembered, and stronger too, in that way people get when they've walked through fire and learned their feet can survive. I finally know the truth, she said. The train had arrived. What came next would change everything. When Lila appeared on my doorstep years later, it felt like time had folded in half, like all those days of rebuilding my life had been leading to this one knock. Her hair was damp from the rain, her coat clung to her shoulders, and in her hands was a thick folder, edges worn as if she'd carried it too long. I stood frozen for a moment. The life I had built here was simple, steady. I had friends who knew me not as that guy from the scandal, but as the neighbor who helped fix leaky faucets or shared fresh bread from Mr. Alvarez's bakery downstairs. I had a job I enjoyed, evenings spent at the river, mornings with coffee and the hum of a city that didn't know my past. And now, here she was, dragging it all back with the weight of a single knock. Her voice cracked as she said, "I finally know the truth." I let her in because, despite everything, a part of me still carried the echo of who we used to be. She sat at my small kitchen table, the one I'd found at a flea market, and refinished myself, and placed the folder between us. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were documents, statements, letters, even a paternity test. It turned out Tara's pregnancy had been real, but the father was not me. The truth had unraveled when the man she'd tried to protect himself slipped and revealed details no one else could know. The lie, carefully spun, collapsed under its own weight. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to feel that surge of satisfaction, the kind where you throw your head back and shout, "I told you so." But instead, what washed over me was something quieter. Exhaustion. The years I had lost weren't going to come back. The trust that had been shattered wasn't going to rebuild itself just because a stack of papers now told the truth. Lila's eyes brimmed with regret. "I should have believed you," she whispered. "I should have stood by you instead of her. I destroyed us because I chose blood over love, and it was the worst decision of my life." I didn't answer right away. I poured us both coffee, even though my hands shook as I set the cups down. I told her about the nights in the motel, the silence in the sublet, the way whispers at work had pushed me into exile. I told her about the one-way ticket, the mornings spent learning how to breathe without bitterness, the river walks that kept me sane. She listened, tears streaking down her face, as if each word was another reminder of the weight her disbelief had cost me. Finally, she reached for my hand. "Can we fix this?" she asked. Her voice carried desperation, but beneath it was something else. Hope. Fragile, but alive. I looked at her, really looked at her. This was the woman I had once promised forever to. The woman who had laughed with me in that small church under strings of twinkle lights, who had shared dreams of children, a house, and adventures we never took. But she was also the woman who had turned away when I needed her faith most, who had stood silent while her brothers nearly broke me, who had chosen a lie over our vows. And in that moment, the strangest realization settled into me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I used to be. The rage had burned out long ago, leaving only ashes. But forgiveness didn't mean reunion. "I don't hate you," I said softly. "I don't even resent you anymore. But I can't go back. I've built a life here, one that isn't haunted by that lie. You were part of my past, but I can't let you be part of my future." Her shoulders shook as she nodded, understanding even as it broke her. She stayed for another hour, telling me about how Tara's lies had unraveled, how her family had splintered when the truth finally came out. Her brothers, once so quick to judge, now carried their own guilt. Her parents had cut ties with Tara entirely, too ashamed to face me after the damage had been done. Lila herself had left the family home, unable to stay under the same roof with the sister who had destroyed her marriage. Before she left, she placed the folder back on the table. "This is yours. Proof. In case you ever need it." I didn't touch it. "I don't need proof anymore," I said. "I already know who I am." She left that night with tears in her eyes, disappearing once again into the rain. After she was gone, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the coffee cups gone cold. I thought about the boy I had been when it all started, the man desperate to defend himself, desperate to cling to love that slipped away no matter how tightly he held on. That man had vanished the moment I boarded the plane years ago. In his place stood someone different, someone stronger, someone who knew the deepest revenge wasn't anger or payback, it was peace. Over the following weeks, I saw Lila's messages come through on my phone. Long paragraphs, short apologies, memories she wished she could relive. Sometimes I read them, sometimes I didn't. Eventually, they stopped altogether. And life went on. I kept working, kept running by the river, kept laughing with friends over late-night pizza. I even started seeing someone new, a quiet teacher who loved the sound of rain and the smell of old books. We took things slow, but there was something in the way she listened, the way she trusted first instead of doubting, that felt like sunlight breaking through after years of clouds. Every now and then, I would think of Lila, of the life we had dreamed about, of the family dinners where laughter once echoed. But those thoughts carried no sting anymore. They were just old photographs in a dusty album, parts of a story I no longer needed to reopen. Because the truth had finally come, and with it closure. What I didn't know then was that Tara herself would one day show up, and when she did, everything I thought was settled would once again be turned upside down. Weeks passed after Lila showed up at my door with the truth in her hands and regret written across her face. For the first time in years, I felt like the weight of that lie had finally lifted, but not in the way she imagined. Her apology didn't stitch the wound shut, it only reminded me of how deep it had cut. I had moved on, and there was no rewinding time to fix what had been broken. I thought that was the end of it. But I was wrong. It was a gray morning when I heard another knock at my door, loud, uneven, frantic. When I opened it, there stood Tara. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, her eyes hollow, and her confidence, the very weapon she had used to destroy me, was gone. She clutched a small bag in one hand, desperation radiating from every line of her face. "Please," she whispered, "I need your help." For a moment I simply stared. This was the woman who had lied so easily, who had fabricated a story that turned my life upside down, who had watched with dry eyes as her sister's marriage crumbled and her family turned me into an outcast. And now she stood here, trembling, begging. I let her step inside, not out of kindness, but because I needed to hear why. She broke down at the table, the same spot where Lila had once placed the folder of truth. Her words tumbled out in fragments. The real father had left her, debts had piled up, her family had cut her off completely. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore, that every night she heard my name echo in her conscience, that she saw my face every time she closed her eyes. She reached across the table, tears streaming, and said, "I ruined your life. I ruined my sister's too. I thought if I lied I could control everything, but I destroyed everyone I loved. Please, say something." I looked at her, at the same hands that had held fabricated evidence, at the same lips that had spoken poison. For years I had imagined this moment, the confrontation, the apology, the desperate plea. And yet, all I felt was clarity. "You didn't just ruin my life," I said calmly. "You ruined your own, and no apology will erase the years I lost. But I won't carry your guilt for you. That weight is yours alone." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't flinch. I had rebuilt myself too carefully to let her drag me back into the storm she created. I opened the door and told her she needed to leave. She begged. She promised she would make things right. She even offered to tell the world the truth again. But I shook my head. "The truth doesn't need you anymore. It already found me. Now it's your turn to face it." She stood there, broken, before finally walking out into the cold morning. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it with a deep breath. That was the last time I ever saw her. And in that silence, I realized something powerful. Revenge hadn't come from shouting, from exposing her, or from watching her crumble. It came from refusing to let her story define me anymore. My life was peaceful, whole, and mine again. She was just a shadow on the outside of a locked door. And the best part, for once I didn't feel like the victim. I felt free.